For the introduction, Mrs. Shamima. And thank you very much, all the chartered accountants and the chartered accountant aspirants who have invited me on a holiday, a great day for our country, the 74th Indian Independence Day. I think we should always begin with a tribute to all the people who made it possible for us to live free, not under any foreigner, but managed by ourselves. Um, I know we are living very difficult times. I must confess that I'm not. It's fashionable these days to begin every lecture or anything with a disclaimer. Most of the movies start with the disclaimer saying that no animals were hurt during the making of this movie. I start this lecture with this disclaimer that I'm not an expert in life. What I have gathered is gathered over about 4 decades of living on this planet and probably one of the most difficult circumstances in the lives of my patients, as I operate on brain and the spinal cord at the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute of Medical Sciences. So that I'm not sure if that gives us anybody kind of expertise to speak about life and managing life. But then most of the greatest tennis coaches are people who are not champions in tennis. So I take the same view, this thing, to give a few homilies to all the chartered accountant aspirants who are present here today to listen to this. I'm sure you must have heard of this word called stress. If you go into the dictionary, you will find it has got many meanings. It can be something associated with the mind, it can be a stress on a physical sense, stress on a word or a syllable, stress as in music, stress as illness. But then today, I'm only going to talk about pressure or worry caused by problems in life. That's the simplest definition of stress as far as I'm concerned, because I see people who are stressed in my everyday life. Why is stress so important? Because it affects life profoundly. There is a science of stress research that is already happening, which is actually a combination of psychology, medicine, and a lot of other subjects. Uh, if you go into the definition of stress as I see it, it is a condition or a situation experienced by a person when a person perceives that the demand exceeds the personal and social resources that the individual is able to mobilize. Each individual thinks that he can do this or that. If the demand is more than what he can harness from himself, that's when he is stressed. So stress leads to kind of a biochemical response within us. That's what usually happens with stress. And this can be harnessed into doing good or bad. What comes out of stress can either be good or bad. You know, all stress is not necessarily bad. All depends on how we perceive the stress. Sometimes stress can lead to accelerating creative and successful work. But then most of the times, stress is seen as something negative. It leads to a kind of failure, humiliation, and infections, leading to desperate decisions, as it has happened many times in my life around me. As a neurosurgeon, I cannot miss the brain because that's where the seat of everything is. The brain, as you know, has got three areas which are of importance. One is called as the prefrontal cortex, which is located just in front behind your eye. The other two, a small area which is about 1 centimeter, less than 1 centimeter in size, called as amygdala. The amygdala is the seat of all your emotions. And then you have a seahorse-like appearance called as the hippocampus. This is where the memory lies. Most of the short-term and long-term memory lies. All the three have got a profound influence on the way we conduct ourselves in our life. The prefrontal cortex, which is kind of concerned with executive decision. Say, for example, you want to send a mail. What you do in my younger days, when you want to send a mail by post, what you call a snail mail these days, you got to write a letter, put it inside an envelope, close it, and then write the address, affix the stamp, go to the post box and deliver it. These are the functions of what is called as the prefrontal cortex. That is the component functions that executes actions that you want to do. It is done by the prefrontal cortex. But then the prefrontal cortex is affected by the other two, the amygdala, which is actually triggers a set of emotional responses, which has got a profound influence on the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala, of course, is influenced by the hippocampus, the third structure that I was referring to, which is actually where the memory is stored, both pleasant and unpleasant. Now, how does this relate to us in our everyday life? Uh, I'm going to say a few stories during this lecture. I hope that will keep you away from being bored with something as big as something as kind of sedate and sleep inducing as neurosurgery and neurology. Um, there was this patient of mine, which is actually incidentally, this lady was my relative. She went to a hotel in Trivandrum and ordered a vegetarian lunch. And when the food was being ordered, the food came after some time. The restaurant gave very little good food. But then as she was chewing, she found something very unpleasant inside her mouth. And then when she spat it out, it was a stub of a beedi. Now, when she saw this beady stub in the food and finally she experienced it, she didn't relish it actually, experienced it inside her mouth, she immediately vomited. And the restaurant offered its apologies and paid back some money, and yeah, and they didn't have to pay the money, and then but then she was left devastated because of this recurring thought of the beady. Now, what happened to her later was that whenever she came close to this restaurant, she started throwing up. So this is how your memory, especially your unpleasant memory and emotions, influence your life. So you have the hippocampus where this memory of unpleasantness is stored, the amygdala where this kind of an emotional reaction is perceived and decided, which influences the prefrontal cortex to kind of vomit. So you can understand how everything influences, small things influence the human mind and the human behavior. Another example of how the brain controls our everyday action. For example, the simple act of urination. When you're a child, you pass urine whenever your bladder is full. You don't, and when you're 3 to 4 years of age, you still don't have any social kind of phobia about passing urine in public. But as you become aged, you gain a certain kind of control over your this thing. The moment the bladder is full, you don't pass urine wherever you feel like. There's a social conditioning which makes you wait, go to the toilet, find the nearest toilet, and then relieve your bladders. The prefrontal cortex actually influences you about this. The spinal cord says the spinal cord is the lower control which controls the urinary bladder. When the bladder is full, the spinal cord says pass urine. But then the prefrontal cortex says, don't do it now. This is not the best place for you to pass urine. Wait till you go to the bathroom. So the prefrontal cortex is actually controlling what you do because it is not allowed to be influenced by anything else. That is how the conditioning is. Now, if this conditioning goes, as it happens in Alzheimer's disease or something, you pass urine wherever you are. The social phobia, the social conditioning that is kind of influenced, that kind of controlled by the prefrontal cortex is lost. So this is what happens when a person perceives something as bad and reacts to it. Now, let's look at what are the common stresses that a human being encounters as he lives his life. First and foremost, being a doctor, I encounter health-related stresses, both mental and physical. And the second big thing is, of course, interpersonal relationships. And as you know, if you go to any lawyer, you'll find that Kerala has on topping the divorce charts, which means that marriages are failing faster than changing fashions in Paris. Workplace stress. Definitely, everybody has a problem in workplace. An ideal place is no, you cannot find an ideal place for work, but then workplace is another significant contributor to stress. Commuting to work, people, for example, in Bombay, commute for about 2.5 hours every day to go to their workplace. We are blessed in Trivandrum because most of our institutions are located within, walking or even at short travel distance. Aging is another stress because of a certain sense of loneliness and insecurity that comes with it. Now, let's see what happens when we are stressed. What happens to you when you are threatened? Let's look at it this way. You are walking through a road and suddenly a lion comes in front of you. What does that happen? You have a hormone called as adrenaline that is released in the brain. And the next response is you can either run as fast as you can, or you can use some form of weapon which you have in your hands and hit it. Let us look at how a caveman used to do it. Caveman, when he encounters a lion, he has a club or something in his hand. He uses that to thwart the lion's attack, hit the lion as hard as possible, or climb as fast as possible into the nearest tree, or run as fast as possible. This is what the adrenaline does. So we either flee or fight, flight or fight. One of those things happens. Now shift this. So what shift this to the modern life? You're not a caveman. You wear good dresses. You are a professional. You go to an office, but your colleague has tricked you, and he got a promotion far ahead of you. The moment you see him, adrenaline gets released, and there you are. You're seething with anger. The next thing that happens to you is your blood pressure rises, you sweat more, your acid starts secreting in the stomach, your pupils dilate. So what does the adrenaline, the stress hormone, does to your body? The heart starts pounding, your BP increases because you need more blood in your muscles, because you're still a caveman as far as the body is concerned. You need to either run as fast as possible. For that, you require a lot more of blood. So the BP increases, the heart rate increases. The blood is diverted from non-essential areas to essential areas like the muscle. Fat and glycogen gets converted into sugar to meet energy needs. And your pupil, the eye dilates to give you a good vision so that you can fight the lion very well. Now, unfortunately, your blood boils, you sweat, your BP shoots, you go speechless, but you can't do anything. Let's look at another situation. You're searching for a parking space in a city. This happens very frequently, even in Trivandrum. You have waited patiently behind a car which is about to leave. Suddenly, there comes a smart aleck from somewhere, from the opposite side, and takes your slot. What do? You have an adrenaline surge again. Another situation. This also happens in Trivandrum. It happened to one of my patients who reported to the casualty with a brain bleed because his neighbor dumped garbage in front of his house and acted as if he knew nothing. So he went to pick up a quarrel with him, making him realize that what he is doing is wrong. But then in the end, he ended up the person, a victim of it. He had a brain bleed because his BP shot up too much. Situation 4, annual medical checkup. Every time when a person comes to you for a BP check, BP just remains a little higher because he's apprehensive that something is going wrong. His adrenaline is already there. Situation 6, this is very common amongst the mothers of Trivandrum. There is an interesting book in US called as a Tiger Moms. The Tiger Moms, is about an interesting expression called as Tiger Moms in US. Tiger Moms are mothers of Indian, Chinese, and South Korean children who kind of fight for their children's rights, ensuring that they do extremely well in academics. There are many Tiger Moms in our midst in Trivandrum who ensure that their children do well. In fact, they put more effort than their children's education, and end up harming themselves if the child fails to realize their aspirations, not the child's aspiration, the mother's aspirations. Situation 7, old people travel to a faraway place. I have an aunt who used to kind of go around the globe because her children were located in different parts of the world. Unfortunately, each travel was preceded by a strange sense of fright from which he has not been relieved even to date. Marriage, divorce. So what happens is, all these are situations which leads to a release of adrenaline. What happens to this mobilized energy? You become jumpy, excitable, irritable. You have a trembling heart. Unfortunately, you're not able to execute precise and controlled skills. Now, how does this stress and the stress response contribute to illness? Your adrenaline response is very, very harmful if you don't expend your energy. Your heart unnecessarily gets beats faster. Your blood pressure shoots up, ruptures arteries. We have seen many temper tantrums followed by strokes in my practice. Fat, glycogen mobilized for energy needs, which get deposited in the blood vessels, making these blood vessels narrower. They are not able to deliver blood because the fat that is harnessed for utilizing it as energy does not get used up, because you're sitting in an office, you're sitting in a home, you're sitting in a classroom, you're seething in anger, your adrenaline is high, there is no physical activity at all. So what happens is, all this fat and glycogen and all gets deposited within the walls of your blood vessels and narrowing the blood vessels, leading to strokes, heart attacks, etc., kidney disease. Acid and digestive juices get secreted a lot because it is meant to digest the food and give you more energy to fight or flee. So, but then you are not fighting. All these juices lead to destruction of your gastrointestinal lining and leading to ulcer and other disturbances. How do we tackle stress? Stress can be in two ways. It can be an acute one or a chronic one, which has happened over a lot of time. First thing that you have to do when you're stressed is to identify the problem. You step back when you're angry, see for yourself how you want to respond. I always tell all my patients that the best antidote for a healthy life, apart from food and good water and good air, is exercise. Now, how does exercise change your health? It improves your muscle function because a muscle, a kind of supple and strong muscle, as it happens to people who are exercising regularly, gives you that pep in your step. You can climb stairs just like that. You're not fatigued at the end of the day. You don't find it difficult to do physical work if it is required. It lowers the blood pressure because the muscles keep dilating, taking a lot of the arterial blood vessels, dilating the blood vessels, muscles inside the blood vessel walls, leading to lower blood pressure. The sugar gets used more effectively. Glucose uptake inside the cells is improved. So the blood sugar comes down. Boosts your immunity because what happens is when you exercise regularly, the white blood corpuscles, the cells which are concerned with your defense every day from bacteria, viruses, and other organisms, work much better, are kind of created more so that you don't fall a victim of common and colds and other mild infections. Reduces osteoarthritis. As you know, every second person is waiting for a knee replacement or a hip replacement or something like that. So if you exercise regularly, you remain supple. The degenerative process in your joints are delayed. Prevents colon and breast cancer. That's another thing which has been happening. There is an emerging data that this can be reduced. It doesn't completely avoid it. It reduced with the help of exercise. Now, the most important thing in recent times where exercise makes a difference for all of us human beings is that it prevents depression and boosts confidence. How does it do that? There are many experimental studies which have proved that people who exercise regularly have less incidence of dementia. And then the most important thing, how does it prevent depression and how does it boost confidence? There are two hormones called as endorphins and enkephalin. They are called as endogenous morphine-like substances. I'm sure you must be knowing morphine. Morphine is an analgesic. It reduces the pain. It gives you an euphoria. But then if you take morphine from outside, you become dependent on it. But then when you exercise, there are two hormones called as endorphins and enkephalins, which are released in physiological proportions, not in excess as it happens when you take it from outside, which gives you a very pleasant feel throughout the day. All through the day, your endorphins and enkephalins will ensure that you're not depressed, you're bright and beautiful. So exercise has got the greatest fringe benefit on your brain, and that is by producing more of endorphin and enkephalin. And then most importantly, enjoy 10 minutes of solitude every day. If you stop, pause, and reflect on the day, you reflect on what you went through, the people you met, what made you happy. I always recommend this for women who work non-stop throughout the day for their children, for their families, and at work. So take time off, enjoy a few minutes of solitude. I want all of you to do this. If you can maintain a diary, it would be perfect, but then most of us are kind of extremely lazy when it comes to making an account of what we do in the day. This is one of the things which I have to stop first before I recommend it to you. Screen addiction, laptops, mobiles, and television. What happens is in children, it prevents outdoor activity. And more children are becoming myopics. The reason is simple. They are glued to a single screen all throughout the day. In adults, it reduces physical activity. So go for screen holidays. Go without the screen. Go off the grid for some time every week so that your stress levels come down. You don't have to know everything. There's an information overload on the internet, which leads you to more confused than finding all the right answers. So you can go without the screen at some point of time. I stop for some time now. I pause for asking one question. Am I going very fast? Am I understood by everyone? Is there anything that I should change? Are there any questions at this point of time? Or you'll ask the questions at the end of the session?
No, sir. You're good. Yeah, you're clear. We'll have the Q&A session after your session, sir.
Fine. Am I going a little too fast for the audience? I hope the audience can relate to what I'm saying. I hope I have not put people on sleep mode. Hello?
No, sir. No,
Yeah,
sir. You're
not
clear.
actually.
No, sir.
Fine.
Yeah,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
It's fine, sir.
So I'll go to the next point. This is not about managing stress. This is about achieving, because there are many students in this audience. Understand, we all need to pass certain hurdles to reach somewhere. For example, for me, I had to study for 13 years before I became a neurosurgeon. Uh, I joined medicine when I was about 18, and then I finished by the time when I was 32. So you can understand how difficult it was. And every day, for me, it was like I was wondering when this will all end, but then it ended. But to remain, to remain riveted to something, to do something that you want to do in life, you need something called focus. Unfortunately, focus is not taught in our schools. You know, we need that to pass examinations. We need that to perform well. So one of my recommendations for kind of achieving success is to remain focused. And how do you do that? Switch off your mind from the mundane and keep remaining riveted to what you want to do in your life. In 2007, I was working in a hospital called as Hinduja Hospital in Mahim in Mumbai. So in many days, I used to, whenever I get an hour off, I used to take a walk. The Shivaji Park grounds was located close by. And 2007 was when Sachin Tendulkar was still playing for the Indian team. And he was an icon who has been trained by a coach called as Ramakant Achrekar in the same ground where I was. I couldn't meet Sachin Tendulkar there. I met him somewhere else. But there were a lot of hundreds and thousands of Sachin wannabes who were there trying to make a career out of cricket. Just what Sachin did. When I was talking to somebody who had known both Ramakant Achrekar as well as Sachin Tendulkar, they were saying the passion and dedication that Sachin Tendulkar showed to master the game. Being a master batsman did not come easily for him. For example, one of the things that they told me was that each stroke, Sachin would play at least 500 to 1,000 times. Each stroke, he will perceive that the ball is coming in this direction, and he will play a stroke accordingly. In cricket, when a fast bowler like Shoaib Akhtar is bowling at you, you have a few seconds, nanoseconds only to react to it. And this reaction cannot come after a well thought out process. It has to be a reflex. What Sachin used to do was he would practice the shots in his mind, and that when the ball comes, he does not need to think. It comes as a reflex response. For example, when you touch something hot, you immediately withdraw and prevent yourself from being burned. Similarly, Sachin's shots were so well trained in his mind that he just did not require time to think about it. So if you want to do something and be successful in it, you have to do that repeatedly. This is what focus is all about. Don't get disillusioned with initial failures. I'm sure there are many chartered accountants who would have struggled to reach there, just as we medical students do. We have struggled for several years before you become something big. Understand? You're still struggling because you're still learning new things. Everything around us keep changing, which means that the learning never stops. So what I would recommend for people like you, all of us, is that keep repeating the things until you achieve mastery of what you want to achieve in your life. And for the older amongst us who do not have exams to pass, have an everyday purpose. And this purpose will transcend our bodies and minds. Disease, fatigue, etc. moves away when we have a purpose in our life. To survive is to suffer. But then if you find a meaning in that suffering, you will be happy to do and live well. Speaking of a purpose in life, I would recommend all of you to read this book by a psychiatrist called as Viktor Frankl. The title of this book is Man's Search for Meaning. Let me tell you something about Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a psychiatrist who practiced in Austria of Vienna in 1930s. Frankl was a Jew, and that was the time when the Nazis were running Germany. They moved into Austria, and then they conquered, And Adolf Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, who was Hitler's deputy, had this plan for the Jews of the world, the final solution. He wanted to eradicate all the Jews from the face of the earth. So what he did was he created gas chambers in many places in Europe and sent all the Jews to those places. The healthy among them worked hard in their factories on making armaments so that the war industry could run. On the other hand, people who were unhealthy, who were children, or who fell ill, they were all sent to the gas chambers and gassed to death. Now, Viktor Campbell was also put in a railway carriage, a cattle carriage, and sent to to a concentration camp. So when he reached there, the only purpose in his mind was to be with his wife. He had just been married for under a year, and he had the manuscript of his book that he wanted to publish in his hand. Unfortunately for him, his wife was sent to another concentration camp. And as soon as he entered the concentration camp, the Nazi soldier, the Gestapo man who was manning the gates, confiscated his manuscript of the book. He pleaded with that guard to let the manuscript be saved. But what the guard did was he burned it in front of his eyes. And it left Viktor Campbell in tears. Now he entered into the camp, and the camp conditions were very extremely difficult. There was hardly any food, and the European winter was difficult to live. And then above that, people were dying around them, and all these people, including doctors, were made to do hard physical labor. What Viktor Campbell did was, during those days in the concentration camp, was to set up a conversation with his wife, who he didn't know whether she existed or not, because she has been sent to another camp. So every day in the evening, he will assume that his wife is sitting across him in the dining table. He will narrate all the events around the day. He will narrate from his memory how they met, fell in love, and got married. He will narrate about the pages of the book that he wanted to write. Another thing that he did was always narrate the chapters in his book to his memory and commit it to memory. All this happened, gave Viktor Campbell a purpose to survive, to live, and survive the concentration camp. 1945, the Nazis were defeated in Germany. The American troops moved in. The concentration camp was opened up, and people left. Unfortunately for Campbell, he did not have a wife left because she was already killed by the Nazis. He was left only with his book, which he lived to write. So what Viktor Campbell left as a message for people who are, from his suffering, for the people who have yet to go through it, was the fact that please find a purpose in your life. Let it be love. Let it be in love. And this will give you a purpose to live. Viktor Campbell's message is always there in our practice. I will relate to a story in my practice. There was a time in 2000 when I was still a naive resident in neurosurgery. A patient came to my hospital with a brain bleed. And this was a very famous gynecologist in Trivandrum. Her husband was also a doctor. So she was admitted there, and she was operated in an 8-hour surgery, which would clip a blood vessel which had ruptured in the brain. And following the surgery, she was kept in the ICU for a week. So every day evening, her husband, who was also a doctor, would come in. This husband was an army man. He was very strict. He will speak only a few words. And this lady used to yearn for his affection. In the evening, when this man walked in, this lady would say, "Sar vanno, sarne kanumbo endu sandosham." By the time the man would say, "Indira, don't be sick. You are a patient and you are supposed to take rest." And he will not talk at all. That was his style of taking care of his wife. He was a very responsible man, very much in love, but he could not show his affection at all. On the other hand, around the same time, a lady called Annamma walked in with a bad brain tumor to our hospital. She was accompanied by her husband, Piley, who kind of wore very, almost near torn clothes, beetle nut stained teeth, and he walked into the hospital. I explained to him that his wife is unlikely to survive the surgery or the post-operative period. All he would say was, "Uvu, uvu, uvu." Uvu, uvu, uvu is the way people in and around Kotem and the hills respond to in their conversation. He would say 100 uvu, uvu, uvu during the conversation. I was wondering whether he understood what I was narrating to him about his wife's condition. Now, Annama went through the surgery around the same time when the doctor also went through the surgery. Unfortunately for the doctor, she went through one crisis after the crisis, and it took about 3 months for her to leave the hospital. Annama, who had a hopeless situation after surgery, went down from the ICU to the ward where her husband had access to him. Every day evening, Piley would come and stand next to her and kind of kneeling down near her bed. One day I was peeping through the nursing station. I was wondering whether this man was kissing her. I went close by and then I realized that he was murmuring something every day to her. In fact, what he was doing was he was narrating the day's events, whom he met, how he got the money to take care of his treatment, what he ate, and all the simple things which we consider as insignificant. I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised, to see Annama make it through a difficult surgery, whereas the doctor, with all the resources and money that she had, went through crisis after crisis. The most important thing, what is the message that it gives us all? The most important thing is you need to be loved to live. If you have somebody waiting for you, you have this thing inside you to survive it. The will to live comes because you are cared for. Let's go to another aspect of life which helps you to kind of engineer, helps you to do well in life. Just a minute. There's a phenomenon, I'm sure you must have heard of perception and engineer. How do you blend these two words in our everyday life? Perception engineering. What we do is every day we are flooded with a lot of input, a stimuli from around us, information from around us. So what happens is when all these things, information comes to us, we react in a negative manner to several of these events around us. How do you guard yourself against harming yourself? Is by engineering your perceptions so that the change the way you response, because the response is where the harm lies. Let me explain to you with an example from my life. I go every day from my house in Pujapura to right up to Sri Chitra for my surgeries. And one day I was hit by a motorcyclist who did not follow the rule right in the correct manner. It was his fault and he hit my car. I have two ways of responding to it. Either respond to him in an angry manner, recall all the names that you can think of his father and other forefathers, and whip up anger within you. Or look at it the other way. He is having a bad day. And after all, it is your car which got dented and not you. Besides, I have a more important function to do. I have to go there and operate. If I throw a tantrum here, it will affect my performance later in the theater, which means that my surgical results will be affected. So I can choose to forgive him. This is a lesson I learned from none other than a beggar who lived in my younger days in Karamana. His name was Subayan. He was called as Chupayan by everybody. This is a story that I wrote in the Hindu in 2012. Forget, forgive, and get on with life. Chupayan was an extraordinary beggar. He begged, but then he also worked. Whenever he was hungry, he would come and ask for 10 paise, because 10 paise those days was kind of quite significant. So what Chupayan's story was that he was born to very rich parents who hailed from southern part of Tamil Nadu. Young Chupayan was an epileptic who used to get epileptic attacks frequently. So Chupayan's parents deserted him on the banks of Karamana River and left for their home. Poor Chupayan was raised by an old lady called Valliyammal who used to live in Karamana. And this Valliyammal used to sell vegetables from door to door. And Chupayan used to accompany him. Chupayan also used to run small errands for people of Karamana. And when he was short of money, he used to go around, ask for money. But he was not a regular beggar. He was not a skinny, thin guy with a lot of ulcers. He was a fat, chubby guy. And everyone used to like him. Everyone used to give him food. One day, Chupayan was walking along the dike that has been built to separate Karamana river from the colonies that occupy on its other bank. I was walking behind him with another person in company. Chupayan was walking in front. Those were days when alcohol was brewed in the banks of Karamana River, and people were enjoying their drink with a game of cards. Chupayan was walking silently there when one of the card players, who was in an inebriated condition, saw him, got up, and started abusing Chupayan. There was absolutely no reason, no provocation for him. Chupayan walked silently with his head held down. But then I was a little upset. And a friend of mine who was walking with me was very upset. I had just become a doctor at that time, and I was walking to a friend's home there. And this friend of mine who was with me got very angry and went up to the drunken fellows and started picking up an argument. After some time, wisdom prevailed. I pulled back people from getting into a big fight, and we started our journey back to our homes. This my friend of mine asked Chupain, "Why did you remain silent? You should have hit them with whatever you have got." Chupain's reply was very simple. "Avangalukku puriyadu. They don't understand." I was taken aback by the profound wisdom of those words. Many a times, many of the stimuli that come from outside, that irks us, that irritates us, are not worth a response. If you respond to all the small irritations, you will lose focus, you will get angry, your adrenaline gets surged, and you harm yourself. So this is what perception engineering is all about. Do not respond to the small irritations unless it really is required. Chupayan taught me a wonderful lesson about this. I have seen people getting angry over, not being included in the father's will, even about, small traffic accidents on the roads. But then they are all doing this at the cost of their health. So avoid doing that. Forget, forgive, and get on with life. That was the title of my story. That Chupayan's story got me about close to 500 emails, which meant that I could strike a chord with people who read it. Now, another thing that we often find is there are many people who end lives on a whim, just because their girlfriend or boyfriend deserted, just because they failed in an exam, just because the mother did not give money for buying something. They just go and kill themselves. On one side, when I see it, I do brain tumors every day, almost 5 surgeries every week. And every day you find patients and their families yearning for a few more years and months or days in their lives. On the other side, you have people who just want to give up. You see this paradox. On one side, people want to live. On the other side, they want to give up the most valuable gift, that is their own life. So this is where you must learn from a politician. We blame the politicians for everything that happens around us. But then you also have to learn from him. He is an eternal optimist. And an IAS officer told me this story. Every politician believes that tomorrow is better than today. If he is a member of the panchayat today, he will become the president of the panchayat tomorrow. And day after tomorrow, he will become an MLA. And the next day, he will become a minister. And the next day, a chief minister. So this optimism is very, very important for everyday life. Dr. Krishnan Nair, who was the director of the Regional Cancer Center in Trivandrum, shared a story from his experience of what difference is it when a person gets a cancer, when a politician gets it or an actor gets it. When an actor gets it, he was narrating the history of Sri Vidya, who died of breast cancer. And at the same time, there were a handful of politicians who had cancers who survived. So the politician always believes that he's going to outgrow the cancer. The cancer is going to leave because the sun will definitely set today, but it will rise again tomorrow. So this is how you respond to stressful situations. It is not going to be night all the time. It is going to be sunny tomorrow. So if you believe in this way, your response to life-threatening situations can be kind of different. You can gather back your confidence and go and live well, because life is never going to be the same. It is going to change every day. One example that I can draw from the history of sciences is how Thomas Alva Edison, who in his 60s watched his lifetime accomplishments burnt into rubble because of a fire. So this is from the Reader's Digest, a book which is not available nowadays. So when his laboratory where he had developed the light bulb and other things were being burned in a fire, an accidental fire, he told, go get your mother and all her friends. They will never see a fire again like this. This was the way Edison reacted to it. When his son said, why are you speaking like this? He said, it's all right. We have just got rid of a lot of rubbish. So later, Edison quoted in the New York Times, although I am over 67 years old, I will start all over again tomorrow. So the world is not going to end with any failure. It is going to open up more opportunities. Let me come to, I hope you're not bored with my stories. Do you have time for more stories or should I stop? I think I've taken more time than what was been allotted to me.
No, sir, you have time, doctor. No problem.
Fine. I'm sure when I was 18 years of age, that's when the Mandal Commission was launched. The reservations, extending reservations to a lot of communities. So we were all dejected because we would not be getting any kind of government jobs. And that was when I met a wise man called as Parameshwar Iyer. Iyer was a botany zoology professor who lived in Shastri Nagar in Karamana. When we met him with this, the declaration from the government that reservations are going to be expanded to include more people, we were all alarmed whether we will get a government job or not. In those days, government was the biggest job provider, and most of us from middle class homes, lower middle class homes, were shy from taking private jobs because the security was lacking. So the Parameshwar Iyer told us a story from his life, which helped me change many things about my perception of life. He had in his house a guava tree, and his friend and mentor, Parameshwaran Pillai, who was also a professor in the Kerala University College, used to come and meet him almost on a weekly basis. One day, and their conversation usually used to revolve around plants, trees around them. So there was in his compound a guava tree, which has been there for 5 years. Unfortunately, did not bear any fruits. Parameshwaran Pillai suggested, why don't you cut down all its branches except a few in the top? Iyer sir contemplated for some time and said, there is a meaning in it. Let me try that. So he cut all the branches below and left only a couple of branches on the top. The rains came. Unfortunately, Dr. Parameshwar Iyer had to leave for his wife's surgery elsewhere. So for a month or two, he was away from home. And when he came back, he had deserted his garden, especially his trees and flowers. For the last 2 months, he was feeling guilty. And when he walked into the compound, his eyes went in search of the guava tree. It was good to see that the tree has already borne some flowers and fruits. Now, what is the take-home message for us? This is well encapsulated in a quote by the German philosopher called Nietzsche. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Whatever doesn't kill us will make us stronger. So if you're going through the difficulties, they leave valuable lessons in your life, which makes you respond in a better way to all the problems of the future. The more the adverse situations that you face and come out, the more you can face in adversity in future. So whatever be the surroundings, when all the doors are closing, look around, wait. There will be a window opening somewhere else. Let me come back to, I'm sure this is neurosciences and money. You guys always talk about money. We talk about neurosciences. Where does the two meet? East is east and west is west, and the twain shall not meet. It is not so. There is a synergy between money and neurosciences, and that is in a part of the brain called as the nucleus accumbens, which is called as the reward center of the brain. It gives you a very happy feeling when you accomplish something. The greatest trigger of nucleus accumbens, which gives you a sense of high, is cocaine. I'm sure cocaine addicts will go do anything to get that high because the nucleus accumbens part of the brain gets triggered with that. What are the things that other than cocaine which stimulates it? Money. The more money you have, the more the nucleus accumbens of the reward center gets kind of rejoiced. So money is another thing which triggers a kind of positive centering of this thing. Another thing which triggers the nucleus accumbens is music. When you listen to a good tune, the nucleus accumbens is triggered and gives you a sense of happiness. Philanthropy, there's something called the helper's high. When you go out and help somebody who in need of it, you feel happy. Accomplishments, say for example, you're a marathon runner. The moment you finish those 43 kilometers, you can still run another 100 meters. You will not feel the stress getting you. The reason is your nucleus accumbens is triggered and it gives you a happy feeling that makes you more go further. So keep your nucleus accumbens occupied by positive things, not by cocaine. Go into music, philanthropy, and accomplishment and other accomplishments. Let me come to the last few slides. I've been asked to talk about life. How do I look at it? How have I survived for almost 4 decades, more than 4 decades? Life is not a pleasure. Definitely, life is never a pleasure. But then you have to find those pleasure moments in your life in between all the difficulties. Life is not a pain. Don't see life as a pain itself, because whatever pain is there will go off one day or the other. Life is a task, one after the other. When you finish one task, the another one will be waiting. And the completion of the task will give you a sense of accomplishment, which makes you pine for more tasks. So this is what Nietzsche said. Life is not pleasure. Life is not a pain. Life is a task, one after the other. There was an interesting story, a movie which I had seen in my younger days, where there was a song called, this movie's name was Dil Chahta Hai. And there is a beautiful line in that, which I'm sure I'm going to say that. I'm not going to sing because I'm not good at it. Humko raahon mein yun hi milti rahe khushiyan. As we live our lives, let this happiness come as we live our lives. Don't stop living. Okay, let me conclude. All good and bad things come to an end. The lecture also has to come to an end. Let me stop with St. Francis Assisi's prayer. Give me the courage to change what I can. Give me the humility to accept what I cannot change. Always be courageous enough to change what you can change around you. Give me the humility to accept what I cannot change. There are many things around us which we cannot change, which we have to humbly accept. And give me the wisdom to know the difference between what I can change and what I cannot change. And the biggest change begins with you. And the greatest victory is the victory that one scores over oneself. If you can win against all the negativity within you, you are successful. Thank you very much for your patience.